fellow coffee consumers and crime connoisseurs. Welcome to the 25th episode of Mugshot Mornings, where we explore true crime one sip at a time. Looking through these glasses. Can you see how crusty dusty? Please don't comment on my appearance today. Okay? Didn't want to wear makeup. Didn't want to put in my contacts. And I'm just not gonna. Okay, so I'm not wearing makeup, I'm not wearing contacts. Yeah, so today we actually have a case that I talked about maybe let's just say few episodes ago, whenever I tried the Sip and Solve segment that y'all let flop. I'm just kidding, I love you guys, thank you so much. Oh, also, shout out to Sydney, Australia. Y'all are almost listening as much as the United States. I will not be visiting y'all. Thank you so much. And it's only because of y'all's, gargantuan spiders. Okay, yeah, so today we have the 25th episode of Mugshot Mornings. If you don't know who I am, my name is Sydney. I do all of the research, all of the editing, all of the filming, everything. This is my podcast where I incorporate true crime and my favorite thing in the world, besides my husband, coffee. Before we get into today's story, we have to do some updates along with what we are sipping on. I did get a new espresso machine. I did do that. My friend, shout out Rachel, she has not used her Breville Express in a couple of years, and she gave it to me. So I am learning. I attempted latte art. It looks like a blob of doo-doo ass, and it's not good, but it's all right. I haven't tried it yet. I saw someone on TikTok who did a sea salt honey latte. So this is what I'm doing today. Okay? We're going to try it on camera. It's hot as balls. So hopefully it doesn't burn my entire mouth off. You see it fogged up my glasses? Did y'all see that? Oh, frick. Okay, yeah. Ooh, that's good. It's perfectly sweet and salty. It has that, honey flavor without it being too powerful. Oh, yeah. I like that. That's yummy. That's yummy hot dogs. Okay, yeah. So today, this case was an unsolved mystery for a very long time. And in recent years, it has been solved. And when I read about it, it's almost 100% solved. There's still a few maybes, but obviously we get into that later. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We are going to be discussing the Bear Brook murders. As I stated earlier, I covered this on Sip and Solve, very summarized, and then I also said that I actually was going to do it in a future episode because I really wanted to. So that is what we're gonna do. One more thing before we do get into the story. One more update that I am going to just kind of reassert for the next couple of weeks until my life slows down. I will be only posting twice a month. I think I switched it on my podcast platform that I upload to. Every other week, every other Thursday is when I'll be posting, just until further notice, because my life is kind of crazy. There may be times, I don't want to be inconsistent. Like I have said before, I'm in school. I have 2 jobs on top of me doing all of the editing, the research, filming. That takes a lot of time until one day where I only have an 8 to 5 and that's it. I can come home and do absolutely nothing. I need to do that for myself, and I promise that's not forever. I would love to post every single week, but yeah, okay. Let's get into the story. I've been rambling. This case starts in the state of New Hampshire in the United States. So on November 10th, 1985, 2 brothers are out hunting, wandering the woods near the Bear Brook Garden Trailer Park, close to the Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. As the brothers explored the area, they stumbled upon a large 55-gallon metal drum lying on its side. They were pretty curious, so they approached to investigate, but one of the brothers noticed something disturbing. A human foot was protruding from the barrel, partially wrapped in plastic. Alarmed, They immediately contacted the police, and once the officers arrived, it was confirmed that their suspicions were correct. The foot did belong to a human body, and the rest of the remains were inside of the drum. Officers secured the scene to hopefully find other pieces of evidence that would help with their investigation, but unfortunately they did not find anything else. Other deputies were called in from their homes to assist the investigation, including one officer whose wife remembered something their son had stated a few months earlier. She remembered that he said he was wandering around the woods, just as the hunters had done, and he kicked over a barrel that had a milky, foul-smelling substance that leaked out of it. Now, if this son mentioned being in the exact same town in the exact same little wooded area months before the hunters had come, then it is very likely that the foul substance that he was smelling and the liquid that he saw was because of a decomposing body. So this kind of shows and proved that the barrel had been there for quite some time. Now, further investigation revealed that there were actually 2 bodies inside of the barrel, an adult female and a young child. The remains were sent to Maine for proper examination, as New Hampshire did not have its own medical examiner's office at the time. The woman's age was a broad gap of her being up to 23 to 33 years old, and the child was approximately 8 to 10 years old. Both of the wounds on their body, found on the autopsy, revealed that they had passed from blunt force trauma to their head. Their time of death ranged from 6 months to 3 years before their bodies had even been discovered. Forensics had recreated what the 2 victims looked like prior to their deaths in hopes of spreading the word. Maybe a woman and a young girl had been reported missing, and they had finally been found. They posted pictures in the paper, stapled posters on poles, and spoke to law enforcement agencies in hopes of someone coming forward to claim that this was their missing family. Sadly, no one came forward. Investigators were unsure if this was a mother and a daughter, but they just kind of assumed that it was. Eventually, the 2 bodies were released for burial. The community of Allenstown came together in support and memoriam of these 2 strangers at a service led by their priest. Both victims had been buried together in one casket, just in case their bodies needed to be exhumed if the investigation led to answers on who they were. Their headstone read, "Here lie the mortal remains, known only to God, of a woman aged 23 to 33, and a girl child aged 8 to 10. Their slain bodies were found on November 10th, 1985, in Bear Brook State Park. May their souls find peace in God's loving care." I don't really agree with the headstone, just before we continue. I don't everybody has like the age, like their birthday and their death date. So I can kind of understand them saying the range of their age. It's a little exaggerated for their, headstone to be that way, along with saying slain bodies. Most of the time, you don't really add the cause of death on someone's headstone. That's just me. I just think this was a little not okay, but maybe they did that so that they know exactly where to exhume the bodies. So, despite receiving hundreds of leads in the months following the discovery, the case went cold and the victims remained unidentified. But fast forward 15 years to the year 2000. A new investigator was assigned to the case. At the time, New Hampshire did not have a formal cold case unit. As explained by State Police Sergeant John Cody, major crimes investigators were informally assigned cold cases to work on during downtime. Sergeant Cody, newly assigned to the Major Crimes Unit, was tasked with the Bear Brook murder case. He was unfamiliar with the details, and so he began reviewing the case file. He was intrigued, and he visited the evidence storage facility to examine the original barrel and other items recovered from the scene. To better understand the crime, he decided to visit the wooded area where the first barrel had been discovered. He wandered around through the site looking for any evidence, trying to gain any insight on this murder that may have been overlooked. While exploring beyond the original search perimeter, Cody ventured approximately 300 feet from the location of the first barrel. There, he discovered a second barrel, identical to the one he had seen in the evidence locker. The barrel, lying on its side, contained only plastic at first glance. Further investigation revealed the remains of 2 more victims. It was immediately presumed that these 2 additional victims were connected to the first pair of victims, and that the second barrel had been in the woods all along, missed during the initial investigation. The police department faced significant criticism for failing to locate the second barrel during the first search. Now, inside of the second barrel, there were the remains of 2 young girls, one aged between 2 and 4 years old, and the other between 1 and 3 years old. They could not find a cause of death only because of the severe decomposition, because it had been at least 15 years, because if they couldn't really tell if they were the first pair of victims before the mother and child that was found in the first barrel found. But in this barrel, it had been at least 15 years if they were killed around the same time. So their bodies were severely decomposed. They could not find a cause of death. But the medical examiner ruled their deaths obviously as homicide, describing the case as particularly heinous and brutal. The method of murder, blunt force trauma with the victims placed in barrels, suggested a deeply personal and intimate crime. Crimes of such intense violence are often committed against a single victim. In cases where entire families are killed, methods like poisonings or shootings are more commonly used. So this level of brutality raised questions about the perpetrator's relationships with all of the victims. Investigators theorized that this was possibly a family annihilator type of scenario, or maybe the work of a serial offender with a psychotic profile targeting multiple victims. At the time, it was not conclusively determined that the remains in the second barrel belonged to female victims. Forensic investigator Kim Fallon explained that skeletal morphology in children that young doesn't definitively reveal their sex. There were indicators suggesting that they were female, but it was not certain. Later, advanced DNA testing confirmed that both of the children were indeed female. As I had mentioned earlier, 2 young girls and their ages, 2 and 4 to 1 and 3. By the early 2000s, DNA technology had advanced significantly, allowing for further analysis. DNA testing revealed a maternal relationship between 3 of the victims: the adult woman, the oldest child found in the first barrel, and the youngest child found in the second barrel. The tests indicated that they were related through the maternal line, whether that was mother and daughter or aunt and nieces, sisters, and things like that. Investigators, however, basically were going to treat the investigation as the woman was the mother of the 2 children. The middle child, the one that had no maternal relationship with the other victims, was unrelated to the woman or the other 2 children. This detail deepened the mystery, leaving investigators to wonder how and why this unrelated child became entangled in such a brutal crime. What was this child's connection to the others, and why has she ended up in the same tragic situation? The discovery of 2 more victims only deepened the mystery rather than providing answers. What investigators kind of ended up realizing is that this family was obviously not from Allenstown, only because there was an entire family that had vanished without a trace and no one from Allenstown had come forward to claim any of the victims. So they were trying to figure out, where are these people coming from, and were they brought to Allenstown specifically, and for what reason? So in 2009, the case was finally handed over to the New Hampshire's newly established cold case unit. There were no breakthroughs until 2012, when the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children joined the investigation. A couple of years later, in 2014, they released more detailed facial reconstructions of all 4 victims, hoping someone would recognize them. Now, besides the new technology showing the facial reconstructions of all of the victims, they also announced a new scientific approach that they'd be using, which was radioisotope testing. Forensic isotope analysis is a method that is used to trace a person's geographic history by examining elements like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen in their bones, teeth, and hair. These elements vary based on environmental factors such as the drinking water, food sources, and it creates a unique molecular signature of where someone has lived. So essentially, the human body acts as a biological map of someone's past. Hair, for example, grows slowly, meaning the ends of long hair could reflect a person's location years earlier, while the newest growth at the scalp shows their most recent whereabouts. Teeth, which develop in childhood, can provide insight into where someone was raised. Isotope testing is a complex and time-consuming process that's often used as a last resort in cold cases, but it happened to be very vital in the Bear Brook case. Also, I didn't know about that. I did not learn this whenever I was in school, in forensics and criminal justice and all of that. So that was very interesting to me whenever I researched this part. I thought it was really cool. So one of the most significant findings came from leaded gasoline. From the 1920s to 1970s, leaded gasoline was widely used, and traces of the unique chemical composition can still be found today worldwide. The lead used in American gasoline originated from a mine in Mississippi, while European gasoline contained lead from an Australian mine. This made it possible to distinguish where a person had been exposed to leaded gasoline. Testing confirmed that the Bear Brook victims were undoubtedly from North America. Now, this was not super surprising, of course. They kind of believed, but it definitely narrowed down that they were not from a different country. Because again, remember, we talked about that police and investigators did not think that these people were from Allenstown. Now it narrowed it down that they were definitely in the United States and they didn't have to look at any other countries. Further isotope analysis revealed even more about the victims' backgrounds. The woman and the two biological daughters had been living together since the children's births, while the third, unrelated child had come from elsewhere. The mother and her daughters had spent their entire lives in either New England, the upper Midwest, or the West Coast, while the unrelated child was from upstate New York, northern Maine, or another part of the Midwest or West Coast. However, none of them had roots in Allenstown or the Bear Brook State Park area. So, again, this further confirmed that they were all not from Allenstown, Bear Brook area, which was their initial guess. Their hair analysis also provided more clues to the case. Testing on the adult victim's hair indicated that in the months before her death, she had been living near Bear Brook. However, 5 to 7 months prior, she had traveled north or west to a colder region. The unrelated child's isotope profile showed the same pattern, suggesting that this was when she had joined the family. In the last 2 weeks to 3 months before their deaths, all 4 victims had been in New England together. But they couldn't understand the relationship at this point with the third child. Was she adopted? Was she from a distant relative? They did not know how she was involved in this crime and why she was with the mother and 2 daughters. So police are wondering, how has an entire family, we again don't know the third child, gone missing without anyone saying anything or reporting their family missing? Now, because they're not from this area, and they speculated different areas that they could be from, they wondered if maybe somebody did report that they were missing, but it just didn't get national attention. But at this point, a nationwide missing persons database wasn't even established until long after they had been murdered. Now, they had these forensic discoveries, like the isotopes. They know where they're from. They know they're from the United States. Even though they had all of these great pieces of evidence, the case again went cold with no other major developments. Now we need to introduce a new victim to the case, and it seems completely unrelated, but remember it because we start piecing things together. We're going to go all the way to California in 2002. A 45-year-old woman named Yoonsun Jun was reported missing by concerned friends. Yoonsun was described as a brilliant woman. She was very artistic. She was very smart. She was a chemist for a biotech company, and she loved doing pottery. Many of her friends and family still treasure the vases that she had made them and the pots that she had crafted over the years. She was known to be very kind, had a trusting nature. She always saw the best in people. Unfortunately, this would be a trait that proved to be her downfall when she met a man named Lawrence Vanner, Larry Vanner for short, around 1999. Yoonsun first encountered Larry while he was working as a handyman in California. They struck up a conversation at a Korean restaurant while he was repairing something nearby. When Yoonsun mentioned that she had some repairs needed at her house, Larry offered to help her out, and from there, they kind of flirted, started a relationship. Soon after that, they moved in together into Larry's home in California. What is described as a very honeymoon-like phase type of inseparable relationship, her friends and family would completely say the opposite. They were inseparable, but not in a honeymoon phase-like way. It was very off. When Yoonsun first introduced Larry to her friends and her family in December of 1999, they all knew that something was off. He didn't make a good first impression, and they noticed that Yoonsun was very in love with him, or maybe she was very fearful of him. When they tried to address these concerns to her, though, she didn't want to hear them, and she pretty much denied any of the things that they were bringing to her attention. In 2001, the couple held an unofficial wedding ceremony. Even though they had a wedding ceremony, they did not have an official wedding license. It wasn't like a legally binding marriage. So, there's not the legalities of it, but they consider themselves to be husband and wife. As time passed and they go further in their marriage, friends and family described Yoonsun to be very isolated. She withdrew from friends and family until June 2002, when no one had heard from her in months. Her friends and family were very concerned and attempted to contact her, but every time someone would answer the phone, answer the door, it would be Larry with a different excuse. She was caring for her sick mother. She was traveling. She was out shopping. Or she had decided that she no longer wanted certain friends in her life. There was always a reason, but none of them ever felt right. Eventually, Yoonsun's friend Renee took her concerns to the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Department and reported her as missing. The case landed on the desk of homicide detective Roxanne Grunheid. Now, this is a name that would later prove very crucial in unraveling a much larger mystery. When Detective Roxanne questioned Larry Vanner, he was polite, soft-spoken, and highly intelligent. Now, Detective Grunheid, Miss Roxanne, told ABC's 2020 in a later interview, with his twinkly blue eyes, he could easily gain someone's trust. All we were really trying to do was determine if Yoonsun was okay, and at first, he wasn't being uncooperative at all. But as they continued to question Larry, his story kept changing. A classic sign of deception. When investigators requested to fingerprint him, the results came back shockingly fast. It turned out that Larry Vanner had been living under multiple names. 2 other names, Curtis Kimball and Gerald Mockerman. Those 2 names immediately came up. Even more concerning, Curtis Kimball was a wanted man. 12 years earlier, he had served time in prison for child abandonment and then vanished immediately upon release, violating his parole. Authorities had been searching for him ever since. With this information in hand, investigators obtained a warrant to search Yoonsun's home. At first, they didn't find anything unusual, but when they moved to the shed that was located on her property, this is where Yoonsun usually worked with her pottery, they immediately sensed something was wrong. The space had a basement, and as investigators went down the stairs, they noticed a massive pile of cat litter, 4 to 5 feet wide and 2 to 3 feet high. There was no odor, but the sheer volume of litter was very unusual. And against the wall was an axe that was leaned up against it. Now, detectives realized that this scene was very unusual, and they started to treat it like a crime scene. They knew that they were about to uncover something horrific, so they started photographing it and treating it like it was a crime scene before even knowing that it was, only because they didn't want to disturb any potential evidence. As they began digging through the cat litter, they made a grisly discovery: a mummified foot in a flip-flop. Now, who did this foot belong to? It did belong to Yoon Soon Jun. The medical examiner determined that she had died from blunt force trauma. Given that she was found inside Larry Vanner's private workspace, there was no doubt about who was responsible for this. However, investigators wanted to be sure that this was their guy. Detective Grunheide focused on the cat litter, reasoning that purchasing such an excessive amount would have been memorable. She visited a local pet store, and sure enough, a cashier recalled selling an unusually large quantity of litter to a man matching Larry Vanner's description. And that was all that they needed. In November 2002, Larry, under the name Curtis Kimball, was arrested and charged with Yoon Soon's murder. Although authorities suspected that Curtis Kimball was not his real identity, it was the oldest name they had on record, so that is what he was booked under. A year later, in 2003, he shocked everyone by suddenly changing his plea to guilty so he could avoid a trial. He likely realized that if he went through a full trial, this is about a year of people really digging into his past, and he may have not wanted that. So he didn't want a lot of secrets that he had to be revealed. Now, this was, I don't want to say good on his part, but it showed that Yoon Soon's murder was just the tip of the iceberg of who Larry Vanner was, or Curtis Kimball, or who we know to be someone different. Now, Detective Grunheide realized that this was the beginning of everything. They had a much bigger picture that they needed to look over. There was a lot of things if this man is going under 3 different names is what they have so far. So Yoon Soon was only the tip of the iceberg. They went back to Curtis Kimball. He was charged and a wanted man for child abandonment. So who was the child that he had abandoned? According to the criminal record, the child that Curtis Kimball abandoned in 1986 was his 5-year-old daughter, Lisa. At the time, he was using a different name named Gordon Jensen and living in an RV park in Cypress, California, working as a handyman and electrician. In this RV park, he had kind of neighbors that he befriended who was a little elderly couple named Richard and Catherine Decker, and they had a grandson that was around Larry. I'm not laughing. It's not funny. That's not why I'm laughing. But what's his name? Gordon. They knew him as Gordon. They had a grandson around Gordon's daughter's age. Gordon had told this elderly couple that Lisa's mother had died when she was a baby. And as the Deckers spent more time with Lisa, they kind of grew increasingly concerned. She was alarmingly thin and clearly neglected. Gordon confided in them about his struggles as a single father, so they made a proposition. Their daughter, who was unable to conceive, was considering adoption. They asked Gordon how he felt about their daughter, who was not able to have a child of her own, adopting Lisa, because he had said, basically what he was telling them is that because he was a single father, he didn't have enough money, and that's why his child was so skinny. He didn't have enough money to even feed her. So they were like, well, we kind of have an opportunity for her to have a better life. So Lisa, when she went into the Decker's care of this old couple, and I could not find if this was the elderly couple or if this was their daughter who was trying to adopt Lisa. But Lisa ended up telling the Decker family that she had a lot of suffering under the care of Gordon. They realized that they really needed to make this adoption official, and they needed to do it fast before Gordon would change his mind. But when they returned to the RV park, he had vanished. They turned to police and let them know who took Lisa into protective custody. Though the Deckers legally could not keep her, they likely saved her life. A warrant was issued for Gordon Jensen's arrest on child abandonment. Investigators soon realized Gordon Jensen was fake. Fingerprints traced him back to Curtis Kimball, but nothing more. Even his social security number was fraudulent. With no leads, authorities could only wait and have him as a warrant out for his arrest. 2 years later, in 1988, Curtis Kimball resurfaced. He was arrested for stealing a car. This time, he used the name Gerald Mockerman. He served time for the child abandonment charge because, again, he's the same person, but he disappeared upon release, re-emerging in 2002 as Larry Vanner, only to be caught for Jensen's murder. We have Larry Vanner, Gordon Jensen, Gerald Mockerman, Curtis Kimball. They're all the same exact person. Now, what is his real name? What was stopping him from changing this child's identity too? Was her name even Lisa? The answer would not come until a decade later when a new detective, Peter Heatley, took over. Now, again, there were advancements in DNA technology, and Lisa took an ancestry test in 2014. Eventually, their results led investigators to Armand Bowden in New Hampshire, Lisa's biological grandfather. His daughter, Denise Bowden, had vanished with Lisa back in 1981. And the man that she left with? A man named Bob Evans. Introducing Bob. We got Bob Evans, Curtis Kimball, Larry Vanner. Different names, but one person. Now, this kind of is crazy for me to say. Again, this is only the beginning. We are tying many pieces together, okay? Now, bear with me because this is about to get kind of confusing. So we have Denise, who left with a man named Bob Evans, who we know to be Curtis, Larry, whatever. Since Curtis has been the main person, so that it does not get confusing, I'm just going to call him Curtis until a new name is brought up. Yeah, a new name. Now we go back to New Hampshire, where the first of the Bear Brook bodies would be found in 1985. By that point, Curtis was already living in California with Lisa. Now, authorities knew that Denise had gone missing from New Hampshire not long before the Bear Brook bodies were found. Naturally, they questioned whether the adult victim in the barrels could have been her. As Carol Schweitzer, a supervisor of the Forensic Services Unit at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, told ABC News, they knew that Bob Evans, Curtis, had spent a significant amount of time on the property where the barrels had been found. He used to do electrical work at the camp store before it eventually burned down. Now, this was a very strong connection, but in 2017, New Hampshire police held a press conference to announce that Lisa's DNA did not match the adult victim, meaning that the woman could not have been Lisa's biological mother. Now, around the time that they are really looking into like the DNA and things like that, Curtis died while he was in prison in California from lung cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and pneumonia. But investigators still had access to his DNA. Now, almost on a whim, they decided to test it against the 4 bodies found at Bear Brook, and the results shocked everyone. The middle child, the one who was unrelated to other 3 victims, came back as the biological daughter of Curtis Kimball, or Bob Evans, or Larry Vanner. There's just a web, okay? And it's really hard to follow, but I need you to just, be with me, okay? So, this was all the evidence investigators needed to name him as the prime suspect in the murders. The chances of it not being him were incredibly slim. Now, of course, they can't really question him at this point because he's dead, but he was convicted and a known killer due to him murdering Yoon-soon. He had an incredibly shady past. He left, changed his name over and over, didn't have a real social security card, so this investigation was going to be a lot longer just so they could find out what his true identity was. The only connection at the time that they have, besides, him killing Yoon Soon, was that one of the children that were found in the barrels was his biological daughter, which is insane. So this became a rare case where the authorities knew who the killer was, but not the identity of the victims. The only time this typically happens is when dealing with a serial killer, which is exactly what Curtis was. But they know that Curtis is not his name. They know that Bob is probably not his name. So who is this guy? Introduce Dr. Barbara Ray Venter. She helped solve the mystery of Lisa's identity, and she was called upon once again. She used a very similar technique as before, where she entered Curtis's DNA into a database, so it striked matches with distant cousins, but slowly but surely building out a family tree. Now, this was the first time that genetic genealogy had been used to solve a case like this. And as we know now, it is the same technique that was used to capture the Golden State Killer and many others in years to come. This was a huge turning point in criminal investigations, and this really forever changed how cases would be solved, especially a lot of, if I remember correctly, remind me to look it up. I say remind me, you're my camera. I think if I remember correctly, and I could be making this up, that is how they just found Jack the Ripper's true identity. Isn't that insane? Okay. Barbara worked through a family tree until she came across a family that she was sure could provide answers about Curtis Kimball's real identity. This included a woman named Diane Clofer, formerly known as Diane Rasmussen. One day in the summer of 2017, Diane received a call from her mother, who told her that detectives from the cold case unit in New Hampshire wanted to talk to her. Diane told the Bear Brook podcast that at first she thought her mother had done something in the past that was catching up with her. It didn't occur to her that it probably was about her absent father. Diane and her mother met with New Hampshire detectives in Illinois, which is where Diane lived at the time. Investigators shared the story of a man they referred to as Curtis Kimball, but they had reason to believe that his real identity was actually Terry Peter Rasmussen, Diane's father. They asked for a DNA sample to confirm their suspicions, and she agreed, but she really hoped that they were wrong. Although her father had abandoned her family many years prior, the thought of being the daughter of a man like Curtis Kimball really chilled her to her core. She did not want to be the daughter of this man, but they were not wrong. DNA confirmed that Curtis Kimball was in fact Terry Peter Rasmussen. Finally, they had his true identity. Now, who is Terry Peter Rasmussen? Terry Peter Rasmussen was born in Colorado in December of 1943. When he was of age, he did enlist in the U.S. Navy, but he was discharged when he was 23. He married Diane's mother in July 1968 in Hawaii, and the couple moved to Arizona the following year, where they had twin daughters. A year later, they moved to California and had a son, followed by another daughter. They eventually settled in Phoenix, Arizona, but in 1973, Diane's mother, his wife, left him and took the children with her. Although the divorce was not finalized for years, he was abusive to both his wife and children. The next year, he arrived to visit his family in the company of an unidentified female, stating he was now living in Texas. That would be the last time that they would ever see him. It seemed he remained in Texas around the Houston area until 1978 or 1979, when he appeared in New Hampshire as Bob Evans. So we have that piece of the puzzle, and now we are just kind of questioning surrounding the identities of his victims, including the other Bear Brook victims. There was one woman who had been paying close attention, a woman named Rebecca Heath, who was a research librarian from Connecticut. In her spare time, Rebecca dedicated herself to identifying the victims, poring over the internet forums whenever she could. She looked for people searching for their loved ones, searching for information that matched what law enforcement had released about the Bear Brook victims. Multiple times, she would follow up on what she thought was a solid lead, only to find that it did not match. She would then give up and start all over again. Knowing that Terry Rasmussen had been named the one and only suspect in the murders, she made connections back to him, scanning ancestry message boards from people missing in California where he had been arrested, or for other people's missing sisters. Rebecca made a list of possible identities for the Bear Brook victims, focusing on identifying the adult woman and hoping the identities of the 3 children would follow. She said, quote, "I would just go through that list and then I would start searching to see if they had public records, if the person was alive, to see if I could find any record of their existence. If not, then I would pursue it further and reach out to the person who had originally posted, looking for the loved ones deep on the internet." Rebecca found a post that was dated back to 1999 in which a relative was searching for Sarah McWaters and her mother, Marlise McWaters. As she dove deeper into this search, Rebecca came across another relative looking for Marlise, who said that Marlise was the mother of a girl named Marie Vaughn. Now, Rebecca had many leads that led to nowhere, so when she posted in this Facebook group that revolved around the Rasmussen case, she really wasn't expecting that it would lead her to exactly what she wanted to find. She suggested in this group that these could be the identities of 3 of the Allenstown 4. She didn't get a response, so she dropped it, but then a year later, she was listening to the Bear Brook podcast, and something mentioned by the host sparked her memory. She decided that she needed to reach out to the woman who made the original post back in 1999. The post contained an email address, which Rebecca tried to match to an active Facebook profile. She did find a match and messaged the woman, and within minutes, she received a response confirming that she had found the right person. Rebecca asked her if she had any more information about Marlise and Sarah. The woman responded that Marlise had married a man with the last name Rasmussen shortly after she disappeared. Rebecca's stomach dropped. She knew right away that she had answers to the case. She stated that Rasmussen was not a coincidental name when it came to a mother and children going missing, especially with what we know he had done with other victims. So now we can identify the victims of 3 of the 4 people found in the barrel in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Rebecca didn't mention any suspicions at that point, but instead she started reaching out to the other person whose message she had found, the one who mentioned Marie Vaughn. They told her that Marie's mother had left California with a man named Terry Rasmussen. Within 2 hours, Rebecca got on the phone and called the San Bernardino law enforcement in California, who turned the information over to New Hampshire. New Hampshire investigators at this time were already examining DNA based on information from Marie Vaughn's family. Now, with the advances in the DNA technology, investigators had finally been able to obtain DNA profiles from the degraded remains. Going back to Dr. Barbara, what she was now able to confirm the identities of the victims based on Rebecca's information and the DNA advancements. In June 2019, New Hampshire authorities held a press conference to announce that they had finally identified 3 of 4 Bear Brook victims. The adult victim was identified as Marlise Elizabeth Honeychurch, born in Stamford, Connecticut in 1954. She was the second oldest of 5 girls, and her parents separated around 1961. Her mom took the 3 younger girls to California, while Marlise and her older sister stayed in Connecticut with their dad. At age 15, Marlise moved to California to live with her mother, at which point she took the name Marlise Salomon. In 1970, she met her boyfriend and they married in June of 1971 in Las Vegas. They had a daughter, Marie Elizabeth, in 1971 in California. A year later, they moved to Connecticut, and then a year after that, they moved to Fall River, Massachusetts. Her husband was in the Navy in February of 1974, and they divorced. Just months later, in September of 1974, Marlise married her second husband. Over 3 years later, she gave birth to her second daughter, Sarah Lynn McWaters, in December of 1977 in Hawaiian Gardens, California. Marlise was 24 years old when she was last seen by her family in November of 1978, when she visited them in California for Thanksgiving. On the day she was last seen, she had an argument with her mother over a trivial matter, according to the police news release. They never saw her or her 2 daughters again. Since they'd never seen her, going back to the Thanksgiving, she brought her boyfriend, who was a man she introduced as Terry Rasmussen. She left the event with Terry and was never seen again, at least by anyone who knew her personally, until she and her daughter's bodies were uncovered in barrels in the coming decades. The bodies were found in 1985, at which point they had been in the barrels anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. Marlise left with Terry toward the end of 1978, so it is likely that they lived together or were together for at least a few years before he murdered her and her children. It's thought that Marlise may have taken on a pseudonym, Elizabeth Evans, and lived with Terry, who is now under the name as Bob Evans, in Manchester, New Hampshire, around 1980. The name Elizabeth Evans was listed on a 1980 arrest report as the spouse of Bob Evans, and Elizabeth was Marlise's middle name. If Marlise was not Elizabeth, this could potentially mean there's another unfound or unidentified victim of Rasmussen somewhere out there. Now, that is one of many mysteries yet to be solved in the case. The other one that is kind of the main one is who was the daughter that was in the barrel that was Terry's biological daughter, because she was not related to Marlise, who we were able to identify as the mom of the two daughters. We need to know who this daughter was and who he had gotten pregnant. If that makes sense, it's very confusing because of the many names of him being all over the freaking continental US. Now, still to this day, the identity of Terry's daughter who was found in the barrel still has yet to be identified. We don't know her name. We don't know who she is. The only thing that links her is that is his biological daughter. Okay, so bear with me because this next part is kind of confusing. So the daughter, who is Terry's daughter, we don't know her identification. I'm just going to say Jane, like Jane Doe. I think they referred to her as Doe. We'll say Jane, okay? Jane is Terry's daughter found in the barrel. We don't know what her name is, and we don't know who her mother is. A press release that happened in January of 2021, if I remember correctly, said that the mother of Jane has relatives in Pearl River County, Mississippi. Through genetic genealogy and working backward through the family tree, it has been found that the child and her mother could be descendants of a man named Thomas Mitchell, born in 1836, or William Livings, born in 1826. She would be the 5 or 6 times great-grandchild of either one of these men. The daughter of Terry can be identified in a few different ways. So they know that she was between 2 to 4 years old. Okay, let me actually list it out. She's Terry Rasmussen's biological daughter. So that means that she was born between 1976 and 1977. So that means that she potentially died between somewhere 1979 to 1981. Now they did I looked in October of 2024, they released like a sketch of what she had looked like at the time of her death. So she has about wavy brown hair, was between 3'3" and 3'9". Bone analysis suggests that she may have had anemia during her life. And DNA testing reveals that she is primarily Caucasian with a small amount of Asian, Black, and Native American heritage. She also has a slight overbite. Investigators have made contact with distant cousins, 5th cousins, so very, very, very distant, but no one's been able to provide any helpful information. Now, a lot of people, because of the Pearl County, Mississippi, there's going to be possible distinct relatives over there based off of the mother of Jane. Remember, Jane's not her real name. So people that are kind of in the South, specifically like Louisiana and Mississippi, a lot of the police departments there have been trying to reach out to people to kind of help really end the case, because that's really the only thing left that they have in this case is the identification of this young girl. The final mystery that's still, besides Jane, the identity of Jane being solved, is the location of Denise Bowden, who was Lisa's mother. Now, Lisa, going back, remember, was the girl that he had brought with her to California, and she was identified later by Dr. Barbara. Oh my God, there's so many names. She was last seen in November 1981 in Grafton, New Hampshire. Shortly after this, she left her Manchester apartment with her boyfriend, Bob Evans, and her infant daughter. She was not reported missing at the time, as her family thought that she left due to financial reasons. However, the circumstances surrounding her disappearance are considered suspicious. She was officially listed as a missing person in 2016, and authorities believed Rasmussen probably killed Denise somewhere between New Hampshire and California. If you don't know, there's New Hampshire, there's California, the complete opposite coast. So he could have done it literally anywhere in the entire United States. Denise Bowden was a 23-year-old white female when she was last seen. She was between 5'4" and 5'6", weighing about 120 to 140 pounds. She had brown hair, brown eyes, and a pronounced overbite. Terry Rasmussen, also known as many other names, he had at least claimed the lives of 5 victims that we know. So the 4 victims that were found in the barrel, along with his wife, Yoon-soon. Although there are many possibilities that his number of victims is much, much higher. Now, in San Bernardino, California, which we know he was there as well, there was an unidentified Jane Doe found in 1995 inside a refrigerator dumped in a canal. Like all of Rasmussen's confirmed victims, she had blunt force trauma to the head, and we know that he was in California at this time. So, yeah, I mean, there's the possibility of many other victims, as he traveled everywhere in the United States before he passed away in 2010, which kind of makes me mad because I wish there was more justice, because his plea deal with Yoon-soon's murder was only 15 years. And now he was convicted in 2003. He died in 2010, so he only served 7 of his 15-year sentence. So if he hadn't gotten pneumonia and that pulmonary disease, it is likely that he would have gotten out and claimed the lives of more victims, since they really... What was it? June 2019? Hello? That wasn't a number. June 2019? Is that what that said earlier? It's likely that he would have been out and claimed the lives of a few more victims, or even went under a different name. There were so many names. But it is wild that this case went on for, 40 years? I mean, it was in the 80s and it's 2025. Well, I mean, they found all of it out in like the 2010. So I guess it would have been 30 years. But wow, that is insane. This case was kind of a web. I'm sorry if it was kind of confusing. There were a lot of names that I threw at y'all. So none of the victims tied to Jane, who is the unidentified female whose mother is distant in Mississippi and Louisiana. Maybe he met her in Texas because that's kind of close. We don't know. That's the thing. There are so many webs to this case because, for one, how long it took to identify people. It's really hard to get things with decomposing bodies of that long. Do y'all have any theories or suggestions or anything? I want to shout out to the Bear Brook podcast. Most of my research came from their podcast. If you really, really, really want to deep dive into this story, this was very much a super condensed story, very summarized. There's so much more to this case that you kind of have to untangle for a very long time. Go listen to the Bear Brook podcast. It's very good. They go really in depth based off of the story. It is wild. It's a wild one. It's one of those things that you're going to go down a deep hole for a long time and you don't feel like you're ever going to come out of it because of the web that was spun by Larry, Bob, Gerald, Gordon, Terry. I feel like I'm missing one because there were so many. Oh, Curtis. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening as always. Shout out to all of my other countries that sit in and tune in every couple of weeks. I really appreciate it. Last week, the podcast on like the actual audio only, not YouTube, did so well. So thank you guys for tuning in and downloading all of that. As always, I appreciate it. Please let me know down below if you have anything that you would like for me to cover. I do crimes, cults, conspiracies, creepy stories, anything like that. Also, I still have a Movavi link and a NordVPN affiliate link down below. That is only if y'all are interested in getting any type of... Movavi is like an editing software, and NordVPN is just to protect your Wi-Fi. If that is something that y'all are interested in, you do get a discount, and if you click through the link below specifically, I do get a commission based off of that. So I do want to disclose that, as always. I'm never going to lie to you guys. So again, thank you guys so much for listening. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends, and I will see you guys in the next episode in a couple of weeks. Bye!